We are the Muslim Ummah, and each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah. Chosen as part of the best of mankind, we spread the word of Islam. Every difficulty faced in our lives makes us realize that it's just part of Allah's plan. Feeling stronger, we take it in our stride.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to episode number 26 of our exciting journey. I'm Dr. Steph Caris, the author of Europe's Forgotten Ottoman Heritage, the editor-in-chief of ilmonlinemag.com, and a lecturer of several universities in Europe and Africa. And I had the chance to visit most of these populations, most of these Muslim communities in Europe, but also outside of Europe. Now, of course, Europe being my home continent, that's where I come from, that's where I live. I still travel a lot within Europe and still go and visit different types of communities there. And I find it interesting to see the development and the progress of the Muslims in certain countries within Europe. We mentioned earlier, or the last episodes, the previous episodes, we mentioned in them the Muslims in Eastern Europe, we mentioned the Muslims in Central Europe, mentioned Germany, of course, an important country, France, the UK. But what about Southern Europe? What about the countries that originally already had contact with Muslims, and not just through trade, but they had them for a while, living with them. Basically, there were Spanish Muslims, Portuguese Muslims, Greek Muslims, Italian Muslims. We had them already there, and they were basically more than just reverts. We had several generations of Muslims coming from there. Spain in particular, of course, Spain played such an important role in our Muslim history and keeps playing actually still an important role, because Muslims in Spain rediscover their past. Even I've heard of cases, for example, mashallah, that people in certain villages or in certain areas in nowadays Andalusia, in the south of Spain, have found out that their great-grandparents, for example, or even longer down the line, of course, further back, they discovered that they actually were Muslims. And Spaniards of nowadays are trying to find out their roots and figure out if indeed, if their grandparents or great-great-great-grandparents were Muslims, if there is something about Islam that could be of interest to them too. And we do have quite some reverts in Spain. We're talking official numbers of 30 to 40,000. Again, these are just official numbers, just estimates, as we had to estimate all the other populations, of course, in the rest of Europe. But they do play an important role there, simply because, as in the other countries, they speak the language, they are from there, they're able to move around freely and are accepted. They don't have any restrictions due to their status, being immigrants or illegal immigrants or whatever. So all this is not the case, as it is in the other countries. But furthermore, even some of them can refer back to their glorious Islamic past of more than 700 years. As we said already in one of the episodes that we mentioned about Spain and Portugal, Al-Andalus, the Iberian Peninsula, we said that the Islamic influence was so important for these countries, basically, that we cannot imagine a Spain of nowadays without this influence. More than 700 years of Islamic presence in Spain. That's an amazing amount, isn't it? I mean, 7 centuries and more. It's an amazing amount, and we have to look into this one. The immigrants in Spain nowadays, the Muslims who are around 1.5 million in Spain. Again, these are numbers that, again, some of them are not, they cannot be authentic, simply because many of the immigrants living in Spain are illegal immigrants coming from Morocco. Many of them coming from Morocco and North Africa in general, or Africa even, because many Africans take the route from their African home country up to Morocco in the north and cross basically the Mediterranean Sea. Some of them unfortunately drown on their way to Spain in order to find their luck in Spain and in Europe. Many of them would like to go on. They get stuck in Spain and have to somehow survive. Many of them head towards the UK, France, Germany, the more prosperous countries in Northern Europe. And their interest is rather in employment or trying to survive even than spreading Islam. But the people who are responsible for the spread of Islam in Spain are mainly the reverts, are the ones that accept Islam and find their roots, rediscover their roots again. Seeing that Spain, of course, has such a massive history of Islam, you might expect people to have a kind of have certain emotions towards this exposure of Islamic history in Spain, and how do we deal with them? How do they deal with that? Well, there are two camps in Spain. There are two camps. There's one camp saying, nah, the Arabs, as they call them, the Arabs, this is a new thing, although they used to call them Moros, basically, the Muslims. The Arabs nowadays is a nationalizing of Islam. They did not do that much as it's said. They were here, they occupied us, they were conquerors, 700 years. Whereas the other camp says, no, they played an important role in our civilization and helped us improve also, and helped us go to America, helped us to basically move on after they left. Even they left a lot of quite some legacy behind, quite some heritage behind, which we took, and we discovered America. We went on in the world, and we became a world power. These two camps, it's difficult to say which one is the majority and which one is the minority, but they do exist. And within these camps, you will find, of course, in between, you will find the Muslim Spaniards, who have to somehow find out which one they have to cooperate. Obviously, they consider Islamic Spain a big part of their history, a big part of who they are and of their identity. And that was actually no big deal until, of course, the big 2004, 2001, of course, September 11 changed things, but also the Madrid bombings, which happened in Spain, of course, changed the Spanish population towards immigrants and Muslims and Muslim immigrants even more. Now they are seen as terrorists, even more so than in other countries, of course, because the Madrid bombing affected the Spanish population itself. So again, the perception is different nowadays. Islam is officially a recognized religion since 1989 in Spain. It's one of the only countries that have recognized Islam, like Austria. And it is a country, well, not to forget, Spain is a European Union country, so it will play a role, it is playing a role for the recognition of Islam within the European Union. Adhan is permitted, whereas in other countries it's prohibited. And there is one Islamic party which is trying to gain some votes, especially in the south of Spain, in Andalusia, which is the name of it in Spanish nowadays. Muslims, we're talking about 3 to 4% of the population, and the reverts are playing the majority of the role. Now, Moroccans might be the main carriers of Muslim immigration, or being Muslim, the main Muslim immigrants, but there is a much bigger percentage of European foreigners and of foreigners from Eastern Europe, from the Eastern Bloc states, like Romania, Poland, and European Union, like Britain, Germany, who are basically residing at the coasts as pensioners. The history of Spain, of course, we should not forget, it was a power, a superpower, and had reached America and Africa. This can be seen also within its population. You can find quite some South Americans trying to settle in Spain. Also some Africans, although in Africa basically there's just one Spanish-speaking country, Equatorial Guinea, but you will not be able to find many of Equatorial Guinea's people in Spain, rather Senegalese and Nigerians, which again raises the profile of the Muslims. There are more Muslims from Africa. Spain was Europe's largest absorber of migrants from 2002 to 2007, with its immigrant population more than doubling as 2.5 million people arrived during that time. According to the Financial Times, Spain is the most favored destination for West Europeans considering a move from their own country and seeking jobs elsewhere in the European Union. Now, one thing we should not forget, nowadays Spain has become a country of immigration. People can't go to Spain, but we should not forget that many Spaniards went abroad during the time that they could. Between 1846 and 1932, it is estimated that nearly 5 million Spaniards emigrated to the Americas, especially to Argentina and Brazil. Approximately 2 million Spaniards migrated to other Western European countries between 1960 and 1975. Now, Spain plays an important role for the development of the Muslims, for the acceptance of the Muslims as well. Now, what about Portugal? What about the nation that was the first Christian nation, independent nation, and the first nation to go out and colonize and go to America? Brazil, the biggest Portuguese-speaking country in the world, and the biggest Latin American countries in America, or Latin American country. And we see that, as we had mentioned already that time, we spoke about Brazil. Islam in Brazil is much more important than Islam in Portugal. In Portugal, the population of Muslims is extremely small. We're talking about not even 1%, like in Ireland. Portugal can be in that way considered on the same level of Ireland. The Portuguese reverts are, again, a very small number. And the Islam in Portugal is carried on with some immigrants coming from their former colonies. Don't forget, Portugal was a big colonial power in Africa and in South America. Seeing that Latin America does not have that many Muslims, of course, most of them come from countries like Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, so from these countries which were Portuguese colonies. And they are the ones who are keeping up Islam in Portugal, and they are the ones who are trying to establish Islamic centers. In Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, there is a very big and very beautiful Islamic center, which again is unacceptable in comparison to Athens again. We spoke about it before. Athens in Greece has more than 500,000 Muslims, no Islamic center. Lisbon in Portugal doesn't have more than a couple of thousand of Muslims. Throughout the whole country, it's not more than 20,000, and they have a massive Islamic center in Lisbon. The total population of Portugal is around 10 million people, and the population, as we said, is not exceeding the 20 or maybe 30,000. Again, it's not clear to, the number is not exactly clear, but it's definitely not more than 1% in general, and people come from the Portuguese overseas provinces of Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique, the former ones, and some of them from the Indian subcontinent like Goa. We should not forget that was also part of the Portuguese Empire. Macau and Goa. Macau did not have or does not have many Muslims, but Goa does. So some of the Muslims also come from that part. And that, of course, shows a nice diversity in the country, although most of the Muslims are actually having an African touch, give Islam an African touch rather than an Asian or anything else that we know from before, Middle Eastern or Arab, not at all. Portugal used to be a country of immigration. Basically, Portuguese were going to Brazil especially during the 19th century, like in other countries, but now it has become a land of accepting immigrants. As we said, an estimated 800,000 Portuguese returned to Portugal as the country's African possessions gained independence in 1975. Nearly 1 million came back. Imagine the chaos that time. So inshallah, after the break, we will go further with Southern Europe, and I hope you are enjoying the program. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
We are the Muslim Ummah, And each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah. We are the Muslim Ummah, and each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back after the break. Now, before the break, we had the chance to look into Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. We know from before that the Iberian Peninsula was, for 700 years, part of the Muslim empire, part of Muslim civilization. Now they had to leave, Muslims and Jews had to leave these countries, both of them had to leave the peninsula, and nowadays what keeps up Islam in Spain and in Portugal are immigrants, but in Spain, more than in Portugal, reverts who have rediscovered or are rediscovering their past. Portugal, to a lesser extent, it has more African immigrants from their former colonies who are establishing Islamic centers and mosques within the country. Lisbon has a massive Islamic center, as Madrid also has. Italy, how does it look there? What is the situation in Italy? A big and important country, part of the G7, an industrialized country, very developed in many ways, but divided between north and south, so having own problems already. Italy was known and is known to be a country of immigrants, leaving actually Italy, especially during the 19th and 20th century, when most of Italians went to America, to the Americas, North as well as South America. Country like Argentina, country like the US, Canada, has had a big influx of Italian laborers during the 19th and 20th century, and we should never forget this. Italians, you can be found all over the world. Within Europe, also many of them went to Germany during the 60s, when Germany was signing treaties with other European and non-European nations to come and work in their factories. So now, this has all changed. The picture of Italy is different now. Italy has received quite some immigrants, people living in their country from abroad, and many of them coming from countries like Morocco, Egypt, and Tunisia, as Muslims mainly. Now we have other immigrants coming from Eastern Europe especially, have settled in Italy. And the majority is actually not Muslim. To be honest, the majority is not Muslim, but because, of course, we're talking about the Muslims in Italy, we will have to mention the North African element, which is very important in Italy because that's what is establishing now there. We should not forget that Italy was a smaller colonial power, and it was trying to reach the bigger ones, and it basically in Africa had 2 or, if you want, 3 colonies. Libya was one, Somalia was another one, and Eritrea was another one. So basically 2 at the Horn of Africa, where Islam went first, mashallah, and Libya, which is a North African country. So we expect to find some more of these immigrants from these countries in Italy. Now, in general, it is true you will be able from the 1970s to see the first trickle of Somali immigrants from Somalia, which began to arrive during that time, but they are not the main population in Italy, although they do have a part of spreading Islam and being Muslims in the country, simply because of their common past. Most of the Somalis went to countries that received them straight away, like in Australia, like North America, the UK, and the Scandinavian countries and the Netherlands. But some of them also went to Italy and, of course, play a role now in the development of Islam there. Today, there are approximately 1.5 million Muslims in Italy, which is not a massive population. There are as many as in Spain, but the population of Italy is much bigger than Spain. It's 60 million, whereas Spain is 40 million. So the percentage is different, of course. And still Islam is the second largest faith after Catholicism in Italy. Another important part about Italy, an important point for Italy, is the reverts. Now, Italy, together with France, are the countries in Europe which has most of the biggest number of reverts in Europe, but also in the world, together with the States. So Italy, strangely enough, having the Pope there still does not help Italians to stay Catholics. Many of them accept Islam, and many of them are responsible for the spread of Islam in such a way that, for example, in the 90s, many people from the Vatican, many clerics from the Vatican actually came to the point to warn people of Islam and of Muslims. Recently, women were warned to marry non-European Muslims. Sorry, non-European immigrants, basically, not Muslims, non-European immigrants or non-European people, simply because they said that the culture is not on the same level like the Italian culture and religion, of course. Now, it is interesting to see how people look at certain other people and their cultures, and how they're trying to influence, of course, what has to happen. So there is not a lot that they can do, basically. Islam is spreading still in Italy in such a way that it doesn't anywhere else except in France. So we are talking most probably about a number of 200 to 250,000 Italian reverts, if not even more. The equivalent number in France, most probably even 300,000 French Muslims, who are really a massive amount in comparison to the rest of the countries, in contrast to the rest of the countries. The total representation of Muslims in Italy's population percentage is just 1.4%, a bit more than a percent. That's not really a massive amount, seeing that in other countries, of course, like in Germany, it's 5%, in France, it's 10%. It's not, of course, a massive amount, but they are visible. And some of these immigrants are illegal immigrants who are persecuted by the Italian population. There's a lot of racism and xenophobia going on, actually, in that part of the world. Although Italians were the ones who can be still found all over the world and had most probably such a massive Italian population all over the world as they have the population living in Italy now. The Northern League, which is basically a racist party or with racist tendencies, is the one that influences politics, of course, a lot, and influences also the way that people look at immigrants, but also at Islam. They're trying also, although despite the fact that we have so many Italian reverts, they're trying to make Islam a part of, it's an immigrant ideology, immigrant religion. But in Italy and in France, definitely not, if not even in the rest of Europe, it's not true, but definitely in countries like France and Italy, this is not the case, as we have seen a big number of Italians and French revert on a daily basis. This, of course, is in contrast to the neighbors, to the eastern neighbors of Italy, Greece. Greece used to be 500 years nearly part of the Ottoman Empire. Nowadays, the immigrants or the Muslims actually, first of all, the Muslims who live in Greece are divided within a group in the north of Italy who are the original, the remainders of the Ottoman Empire. Some of them are Turkish speakers, some of them are Pomaks, Bulgarians, but they are Muslims living in the north in certain types of ghettos, you can say, in the north of Greece. But the immigrants play a much more important role, especially because they are in the bigger cities, especially in the capital, Athens, which has 5 million inhabitants. Nearly 500,000, if not even 500,000 to 1 million, are immigrants. 500,000 of them, it's said officially, again, difficult numbers here, 500,000 are Muslims, around 1 million, one something are immigrants in general, and half of them are Muslims. Especially, it's difficult to come to a precise number because of the illegal immigration in Greece. Most of them are illegal. They don't get papers. They're trying to get through Greece in order to reach the prosperous Western European countries, but they get stuck there in the end and have to be returned, have to be taken care of. Most of them disappear, underground, try to hide in apartments with other immigrants together. Interestingly enough, Greece is the only country in the European Union which has a constitution which clearly doesn't allow, prohibits da'wah, prohibits the work of proselytism, as it's called in Greek. Proselytism, basically, we call it simply da'wah, missionary work of trying to come out with Islam, the spread of Islam. It's very difficult to stand outside in the middle of Athens or Greece and propagate Islam as people do in London or in Paris or in other cities in Europe. That does not mean that it doesn't happen. It does happen, but it has become more difficult because of the law being against it. Now, in the north of Greece, the Muslims who live in that region, which is called Thrace, are not more than 150,000, just 1% of the population, not more, whereas the others, as we mentioned, are probably around 500,000, of whom most of them are Arabs, Albanians, and Balkan Muslims. There is a big number of Egyptians where there's a special agreement between the Egyptian government and the Greek one. We're talking about 100 to 150,000 Egyptians in Greece alone, and there is a special treaty between the Greek government and the Egyptian government so that these people who come back to Egypt after they've worked in Greece get their state pension and can retire, can come back to Egypt. But this is one of the only countries, basically. Nowadays, you can find in Greece also a big population of Africans, African immigrants and African Muslims, mainly from West Africa. Nigerians, Senegalese, Congolese maybe, going further down to Central Africa, are the biggest number of people who come from West Africa or Africa in general. Now, we've come to the end of our episode, and I hope that it was interesting enough for you to realize that, yes, immigration brought also Islam to certain countries, but Islam was there in other countries again before. And in the south of Europe, definitely no doubt about it, Islam has a space. And it belongs there. It has a place there, and it should actually stay there. Nowadays, Islam is seen as an immigrant religion, but hopefully these episodes are changing your mind. Jazakumullahu khair, and I would like to see you in the next episode. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
We are the Muslim Ummah, and each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah. Chosen as part of the best of mankind, we spread the word of Islam. Every difficulty faced in our life makes us realize that it's just part of Allah's plan. Feeling stronger, we take it in our stride. We are the Muslim Ummah, and each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah. Chosen as part of the best of mankind, we spread the word of Islam. Every difficulty faced in our life